EU leaders failed to endorse Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas's plan to bolster Ukraine's defenses at the European Council summit in Brussels.
Kirsty Coventry makes history by becoming the first woman to be elected president of the International Olympic Committee.
A major plan by EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas to send urgent military aid of up to €40 billion to Ukraine failed to get off the ground at an EU summit in Brussels. The plan includes sending €5 billion on 2 million rounds of ammunition, as well as air defence systems, missiles, drones and fighter jets. But President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, said Ukraine will be funded for 2025 due to, among other things, the Commission's rearm plan adopted weeks prior.
We have a very good exchange with President Zelenskyy, and we reaffirm our full support to Ukraine. As you remember, we have our last two councils was dedicated on defense. The brainstorming day and last 6th of March, we have a discussion and we welcome and approve the package proposed by the European Commission to increase our defense spending. And now with these instruments, I believe that all the other member states or the different member states will increase their pledges to continue to support Ukraine.
Also on the agenda was Europe's need to boost competitiveness and innovation amid sluggish growth and the spectre of a trade war triggered by US President Donald Trump's tariff announcements. Earlier on, the EU said it was delaying until mid-April retaliatory tariffs against sector-specific targets in the US. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the decision was made to allow for more negotiations with the White House.
We are in principle opposed to tariffs. We think that tariffs are bad. They are like taxes. They are bad for consumers. They are bad for business on both sides of the Atlantic without any question. We are in active discussion with the US administration on this issue, and I can confirm that we decided to adjust the timing of the entry into force of tariffs. The impact of our response does not change.
EU leaders also said they deplored the resumption of violence in Gaza, where over 500 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, many of whom were children. They called for the ceasefire to be put back on track, for the hostages to be released without condition, and for humanitarian aid to be allowed back into the enclave. Shona Murray, Euronews, Brussels.
Ukraine's President Zelenskyy said the country's nuclear power plants belonged to the people of Ukraine while speaking during a visit to Norway on Thursday. On Wednesday, during a call between Zelenskyy and Trump, the US leader suggested to Zelenskyy that Ukraine give the US ownership of its power plants for security, according to a White House statement.
Всі атомні електростанції належить народу України. Це державні атомні електростанції, це у нас це не приватна власність. Енергетика, атомка в Україні, так.
Meanwhile, in a speech to the European Council on Thursday, Zelenskyy asked for at least €5 billion in support as soon as possible in order to bolster Ukraine's defences and urge Europe to continue pressuring Russia to achieve a durable peace.
Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk region have lost ground in recent days, but they're not encircled by Russian forces, despite the recent comments by Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. The Institute for the Study of War has observed no geolocated evidence to indicate that Russian forces have encircled a significant number of Ukrainian forces in Kursk region or, in fact, anywhere else along the front line in Ukraine. The think tank is pointing out at another strategy that Moscow might be pursuing. The Kremlin continues to demand that Ukraine gives up its territory that Russia does not currently occupy, to set conditions to make further territorial demands and, therefore, attacks in those areas. Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated on the 18th of March that Russian forces are concentrating in Kursk region on the border with Ukraine's Sumy region and may be preparing new attacks on Sumy, Kharkiv and Zaporizhzhia regions. The Institute for the Study of War reports that Russian forces recently advanced in western Zaporizhzhia region, Amid intensified Russian offensive operations in the area, likely as part of efforts to leverage Russia's deliberate stalling of the temporary ceasefire proposal to make battlefield gains. Moscow troops are likely intensifying offensive operations in this area to push towards Zaporizhzhia city, amid continued Kremlin demands that Ukraine cede all of its region to Russia, as the control of the Russia-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest one in Europe, has been actively discussed between Kyiv and Washington over the past couple of days.
The European Commission wants to create a single defence market, as outlined in its new white paper on arming the EU by 2030. Right now, the market is divided, with 5 leading countries: France, Germany, Italy, Spain and Sweden, causing a situation that leads to uncoordinated manufacturing and supply chains.
We are producing very many very expensive products, but in the small numbers, and what we need is that the market is able to provide necessary numbers of ammunition, missiles and different defense equipment, and that the countries can consolidate themselves together and buy together, and we need to give the opportunity for the small and medium-sized enterprises to operate on the market.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine, the EU has quadrupled its military production, but the Commission wants better coordination. It says key areas need strengthening, like air and missile defense, artillery, munitions, drones and military transport. To cut costs and improve efficiency, the Commission suggests buying equipment together.
Today, the Germans buy Germans, the Spanish buy Spanish, the French, of course, only French equipment. We need to open the tenders of the countries to other nations' companies as well. It needs to give the possibility to the small countries to be integrated part of that all.
The Commission also wants the EU to rely less on American military equipment. It suggests buying more from European producers to strengthen the local industry. But this will take long-term political commitment.
The question is, will the member states, who clearly are spooked by the international geopolitical situation, will they now really put the money there in a sustained effort? And if there were to be a ceasefire in Ukraine, would they sit back and say, okay, panic over? Or would they really go ahead? Because I think that's the fundamental question. We need European defense, and it takes a decade of effort, a decade of spending to get there.
To fund this effort, the Commission reaffirmed its rearmament plan, which should enable €800 billion to be spent.
Every year, participants from around the world, including government ministers in the energy sector, gather at the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, BETD, to discuss a safe, affordable and environmentally friendly global energy transition. Speaking with Euronews at this year's summit, the outgoing German Vice-Chancellor and Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection, Robert Habeck, called on politicians to put climate crisis back on the political agenda.
Es muss doch möglich sein, dass eine Gesellschaft nicht nur durch Katastrophen lernt, sondern einfach auch durch Nachdenken, durch kognitive Anstrengung. Deswegen, die Lektionen sind alle da. Der Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue hat das nochmal aufgefächert. Sicherheit, Preise, Klimaneutralität, alles spricht dafür, dieses Thema jetzt nach vorne zu bringen und am Erfolg anzuknüpfen, auf dem Erfolg aufzubauen. Also beantworte ich es in einem Satz so: Es braucht Politikerinnen und Politiker, die wissen, was die Stunde geschlagen hat und es den Menschen der Öffentlichkeit immer wieder erklären. Und diese Menschen braucht es auch in den Medien, die immer wieder die richtigen Fragen stellen.
He praised the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen for her leadership. He, however, called for comprehensive reform to ensure unity across the board in Europe.
Also eigentlich braucht Europa eine echte Reform seiner Institutionen. Das Einstimmigkeitsprinzip muss überwunden werden. Wir brauchen Mehrheitsentscheidungen im Rat, auch in der Außen-, Sicherheits- und Finanzpolitik. Ich würde sagen, dass Europa eine eigene finanzpolitische Autonomie braucht, also selber die Möglichkeit hat, Geld einzunehmen Und dann galt der amerikanische Spruch, no taxation without representation or legislation. Das heißt, es braucht dann irgendwann auch eine eigene Gesetzgebungskompetenz durch volles Mandat. Wir müssen uns also auf den Weg machen zu einer echten föderalen Europäischen Republik. Das heißt, die Kommission muss am Ende richtig gewählt werden. Das Parlament muss ein echtes Parlament sein.
Habeck stepped down as leader of the Greens following the party's loss in the February polls. Despite the setback, Germany's Greens helped push through a major spending package that included a special fund of 100 billion euros for climate protection.
Kirsty Coventry has been elected president of the International Olympic Committee. She is the first woman and first African to lead the IOC. She won 49 of 97 votes, giving her an absolute majority in what had been expected to be a tight race. The 41-year-old Zimbabwean now gets an 8-year mandate.
Bueno, yo creo que ha sido no ha sido una elección contestada, ha sido una elección que a mí me ha sorprendido, pero la ha sacado con muchísima diferencia y por lo tanto es una presidenta que tiene un apoyo de los miembros muy potente y eso es una buena manera de empezar una presidencia.
Coventry, a two-time Olympic swimming gold medalist, said that glass ceilings have been shattered and that she was fully aware of her responsibilities as a role model. Key challenges for her will be steering the Olympic movement through political and sporting issues towards the 2028 Summer Games in Los Angeles, including tackling issues such as gender eligibility and the possible reintegration of Russia. She will also have to engage in diplomacy with US President Donald Trump.